Hello, you're listening to a very special interview from the Rafferty Mills Connection. Now, my next guest is probably well known for portraying the legendary comic book characters of Batman and his alter ego Bruce Wayne for the memorable Emmy Award-winning show Batman, the Animated Series. Since then, he's portrayed the role longer than anyone, including Adam West, Christian Bale, and Michael Keaton, amongst others. To give him the proper introduction he deserves, he is Vengeance, he is the Knight, he is Batman. My special guest is none other than Kevin Conroy. Kevin, welcome to the Rafferty Mills Connection.
Well, thank you, and I'm impressed that you know the dialogue.
Oh, thank you. You know, this is one of the interviews that we've set up that people are so looking forward to. I grew up watching Batman, so it's an absolute pleasure to have you on here.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed doing the show. I don't think any of us, when we started it, it started in 91 recording. No one thought it was going to last as long as it did.
Now, before that, you started out initially as a theatre actor. What made you decide to become an actor, and who were your influences growing up?
I went to Juilliard in New York City and trained for the theater. When I was about 17, I moved into New York, and I just knew from an early age that that's what I wanted to do. But I was really drawn to stage work. And so I worked under John Houseman there, and I was in a class that produced a very interesting group of actors, including Robin Williams and Kelsey Grammer and interesting actress Harriet Harris. And it was a very competitive and very talented class. So it was a very interesting time to be at Juilliard. And I got out of there and immediately started working for Joseph Papp at the Public Theater in New York, doing Shakespeare, and then did a lot of regional Shakespeare around the States. Did a couple of Broadway shows, Death Trap, Lolita with Donald Sutherland. So I did a lot of stage early on. And then, you can't really make a living on stage in the States. You have to supplement it with other types of work. So everyone who works on stage either does television or film to sort of supplement it. So I started doing more TV work. And at the same time, some voiceover work. The TV work led me to L.A., I went out to work on initially Dynasty, and then I got a series, Tour of Duty, which kept me there for a while. And I was always doing either a movie of the week or a pilot for a movie or something like that. So I was in L.A. for a good 15 years, and I went back and forth to New York to do theater a little bit, but I really based out of L.A. And while I was there, my agents just suggested I go in on an animated voiceover job. I had done some voiceover commercially in New York to supplement my theater, but I hadn't ever done any kind of animation voiceover. And I really, to be honest, didn't have a big background in animation. The only exposure I'd had to Batman was the Adam West TV series. And so when I went in on it, I was really a clean slate. But I went in with this strong theater background, and I really went into it as an actor with a real clean slate. I had no preconceptions about Batman. And whereas you would think that might be a hindrance, it actually serviced me really well because I was able to just use my imagination and come up with a sound that I thought bespoke the character, and the producers agreed with me. So it was just a really interesting mix of my background and sort of stumbling into this job. It was the first animation job I ever went in on, and it ended up being one that lasted, from 91 until now. So it's been a pretty extraordinary experience. But to be honest, when we first started the Batman the Animated Series, which was the first incarnation of it, I don't think anyone thought it would last as long as it did. We all knew we were working on something very special because the artwork was very expensive, the orchestration was expensive. They were spending twice as much per half hour as the other studios had done up until that time. So they knew they were coming up with a really beautiful art project.
I guess, did the experience in theatre acting help you in terms of your voice acting career later on? And do you have different methods for, I guess, when you do stage acting or when you do voice acting?
Yeah, acting is acting. I mean, it's the same. The process is very similar. What's different in voice work is that you really only have your voice to convey the entire story. You can't rely on the eye at all. So you only have your voice to use. But I think the trap a lot of people fall into, and it's become very, very popular to do this now. So every film actor in LA now wants to do animation. So they're all coming in to do it, and they do guest spots on these shows. And the mistake I see a lot of people make is they tend to overcompensate for the fact that they're only using their voice, and they tend to overact a lot. And the producers have to tone that down. That's the trick, is to trust the audience, to keep it minimal. But at the same time, you can't be boring. It can't be so mundane that, you do only have your voice to tell the story. So you've got to keep it dramatic and interesting and theatrical, but at the same time, not cartoony. It's the phrase they use a lot. That's the balance. But acting is acting. You go to the same place emotionally, basically. What's great about working for Warner Brothers, who they own Batman, is that they tend to book things as a group. So we record them like radio plays. You're all in the studio together. Disney and a lot of the other houses like to record each person separately in their own sound room, so that you're really in a kind of an acting vacuum. And it's technically much easier for them to handle that because they have totally clean takes on each line, and they can master the mixes much easier. But when you have all the actors in the same recording studio, it's technically more difficult for them in post-production to do the mixing, but the quality of the performances they get is so much better. Which is why I think the acting on all the Batman shows has been very interesting, because and it's why actors love coming in on it. Everyone loves to go in on the show. The guests always have a great time because it's really done like an old-fashioned radio play. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of goofing around. It's very interesting experience.
It must be much better than, for example, a lot of animation now, which is that it's just walk-in parts. You go in, you do your part, you go, and you never meet the other people. Whereas when you're all in the same studio together, you can basically bounce off the other person.
Absolutely, that's my point. And I've done bits now for other studios, and I've had that experience where you just go in, you do your lines, and you leave. You never see anyone else. You never experience anyone else. And they like that in a way because, as I say, in the post-production, they have totally clean takes. But in terms of performance quality, they just can't compare. And I think that's why the performance quality on all the Batman, either Batman Beyond, Batman the Animated Series, Batman and Robin, the Justice League, all 4 shows that I've been involved with, the acting quality for everyone has been really, I think, very good. And I get that feedback from a lot of guests who come on the show, too. And that's a good judge of where you stand in the business, because they're going off and doing spots on other shows, and then they'll come into my show and they'll say, boy, the acting in here is just, there's no comparison. This is such a much more exciting place to work. Everyone likes to come back who does a spot on the show.
I wanted to go back to your earlier career where you said you were working a lot of dramas such as Cheers, you were on Matlock, you also worked with, as you said, Donald Sutherland in theatre. Now, What was the experience like of a growing actor working in such high-profile television shows at that time, and also working with actors like Donald Sutherland and being in class with people like Robin Williams and Kelsey Grammer?
I started so young. I was 17, as I said, when I started in New York. But I was big. I was 6'2", and I had a deep voice, and everyone assumed that I was in my 20s. But I was really very young. I left high school early, and my family kind of, at that point, disintegrated. So, there was nothing really to go back to. So I was on my own young, and I was very naive about what I was doing. I think I was too naive to know that I was maybe in over my head. You know what I mean? I was just one foot was just going in front of the other, and it was working. And but I didn't really, I think, at times appreciate how extraordinary the experiences that I was in the middle of were. Like, to pay for going through Juilliard, I had a waiting job at a little restaurant on Columbus Avenue, and at that point, I was just talking about the 70s. Columbus Avenue only had a couple of restaurants on it. It hadn't become the very fashionable street it is now. And I used to be the waiter when I was about 18 in this restaurant called Rusquet's. And it was one of the only restaurants on Columbus Avenue. And on weekends, I regularly gave lunch to, John and Yoko, who would come in because they lived around the corner in the Dakota. And Margaret Mead was working in the Museum of Natural History, and she used to come in regularly for lunch. Peter Martins, when he came over from the Danish Royal Ballet, used to come in all the time with Heather Watts. I mean, it was that kind of atmosphere on Columbus Avenue in the 70s, and I was a kid, so I didn't really get the fact that this was really extraordinary. You know what I mean?